All right, let's dive in. Today, we're taking a closer look at the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter. We've got some excerpts from a biography, and I'm already fascinated. It's not your typical rags to riches presidential story.
Yeah, what's so interesting about Carter is, well, he's both celebrated for his achievements and he's scrutinized for what some see as failures during his time as president, but there's this immense respect for him that goes beyond political affiliations.
Okay, so what makes him so unique then?
I mean, he's seen as both a remarkably successful president and a failed one. So what's the real story, and why is he so respected even by those who maybe didn't agree with his policies?
You've definitely got my attention. We've got a lot to cover, from his upbringing in rural Georgia all the way to his post-presidency work that earned him a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm ready to get started.
Well then, let's start in Plains, Georgia, where Carter was born back in 1924. It was a small, segregated farming community, a world away from the White House, you could say.
So he really was that small-town boy who ended up in the highest office. How did growing up in such a different world shape his values and leadership style?
Well, his parents were a huge influence, of course. His father, Earl, instilled in him this strong work ethic, and a sense of responsibility, while his mother, Lillian, who was a nurse, emphasized compassion and serving others.
So those core values, hard work, community, and empathy, were there from the beginning, it seems.
Absolutely, but we can't overlook the impact of growing up in the segregated South. Witnessing racial inequality firsthand had a deep impact on Carter's worldview. It really fueled his commitment to social justice and human rights later on.
That makes sense. I mean, it's one thing to read about inequality, but to actually experience it, especially as a child, that
Yeah.
must have had a profound impact. So he goes from this small town to the Naval Academy, serves his country, and then goes back to farming.
That's right. After his father passed away in '53, Carter felt this pull, this sense of duty to return to Plains and manage the family peanut farm.
That seems like quite a change from the structured life of a naval officer.
It was, but this period was crucial for him. It grounded him, deepened his connection to his community, and it even kind of planted the seeds for his political journey.
Wait, really? Politics started on the peanut farm.
In a way, yeah. He started getting involved in local organizations, advocating for better education and more transparency in government. His focus on fighting corruption really resonated with people. And in 1962, he was elected to the Georgia State Senate.
So he was already shaking things up, even at the local level. But wasn't there a setback early on in his political career?
Oh, there was. He lost his first run for governor in 1966.
Really? I'm surprised. You'd think he'd be a natural at winning elections. What happened?
Well, you see, this failure, as some might call it, turned out to be a turning point for him. It deepened his faith and forced him to kind of step back and reevaluate his approach. He realized he needed to connect with voters on a deeper level, understand their concerns, and speak to their needs directly.
So he learned from that experience and came back stronger.
Exactly. And in 1970, he won the governorship of Georgia. This marked a new chapter, both for him and for the state.
This is where things get really interesting. I read that as Governor, Carter was actually considered pretty progressive, especially for the South and especially for that time.
You're right. His governorship was groundbreaking in a lot of ways. Just look at his inaugural address where he boldly declared an end to discrimination. In 1970s Georgia, that was a huge GE statement.
Wow, I can imagine. But did his actions back up his words?
He definitely walked the talk. He diversified government appointments to ensure minorities were represented. He reorganized state agencies, made them more efficient and accountable, and he tackled issues like education reform and environmental protection. He was really committed to creating a more just and equitable society.
Give me an example. How did one of those progressive policies play out?
Sure. Take education reform. Carter consolidated the state's university system, aiming for, greater efficiency and accessibility. He also increased funding for early childhood education programs, recognizing the importance of investing in children from a young age.
So he wasn't just talking about change, he was actually putting it into action.
Right. And remember, all this was happening as the nation was becoming disillusioned with the government after Watergate. People were looking for a leader they could trust, someone who wasn't part of that corrupt Washington establishment,
Yes, the Watergate scandal.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to believe how much that shook the nation's faith in government.
It was a major turning point, no doubt. And by 1974, when Carter announced his candidacy for president, America was, well, they were craving honesty and integrity.
So he ran on this platform of being an outsider, a fresh face, untainted by the corruption of Washington, promising to clean up the mess and restore faith in government.
Exactly. He presented himself as a man of the people, someone who understood their struggles,
Yeah.
someone who would fight for their interests.
Okay, that makes sense. But the question is, did he live up to those promises? Was it even possible to?
That's the big question. It leads us right into the complexities of his presidency, which we'll unpack in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, folks, stick with us. We'll explore the triumphs and the tribulations of Jimmy Carter's presidency right after this. Okay, so we left off with Carter riding this wave of this appeal as an outsider all the way to the White House.
Yeah.
But as we all know, the presidency is rarely a smooth ride.
That's putting it mildly. Carter's presidency, well, it was a real mix of high points and some, let's just say, very challenging moments.
Let's start with the highlights. What were some of his big wins, on the world stage?
Well, you can't talk about Carter's foreign policy successes without mentioning the Camp David Accords. I mean, this was huge E.
Okay, for those of us who might not be totally up to speed on, our Cold War history,
Right.
remind us why this was such a landmark achievement.
Imagine this. Egypt and Israel, two nations locked in this bitter conflict for decades, constantly on the brink of war. The Camp David Accords, brokered by Carter in 1978, were a monumental step toward peace in the Middle East.
It sounds like he was a skilled negotiator.
He was, but it wasn't just about, diplomatic maneuvering. Carter took a very personal approach. He invited Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin to Camp David, his presidential retreat. And he really fostered this atmosphere of trust and open dialogue. He even went so far as to handwrite drafts of the peace treaty himself, like shuttling between the two leaders' cabins late into the night.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like he really went above and beyond the typical diplomatic playbook.
He did, and it paid off. The Camp David Accords led to a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, and it's, a treaty that's still in effect today. It was a real testament to Carter's belief in the power of dialogue and his willingness to take risks for peace.
Okay, so we've got the Camp David Accords. What other foreign policy triumphs did Carter achieve during his time?
Another major accomplishment was normalizing relations with China. This was a huge shift in global politics.
I can imagine. I mean, the U.S. and China had been at odds for so long.
Exactly. They'd had very limited contact since the Communist Revolution in 1949. Carter recognized the strategic importance of building bridges with China, and so he took steps to formally establish diplomatic relations in 1979.
So he scored some pretty big wins on the world stage, but you mentioned there were also some challenging times during his presidency.
Unfortunately, yes. Domestically, he faced a number of economic woes. Inflation was soaring, unemployment was high, and there was this energy crisis gripping the nation.
So the economy was really hurting under his watch.
It was a tough time, for sure. These economic troubles created a sense of unease and dissatisfaction among the American people. And then came the Iran hostage crisis.
Ah, yes, the hostage crisis. I imagine that must have been just a nightmare scenario.
It was a major blow to Carter's presidency, no doubt. In 1979, Iranian revolutionaries stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and they took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage.
That's terrifying. What happened next?
The hostage crisis, it dragged on for 444 days. It dominated the news, fueled anti-American sentiment in Iran, and created this constant sense of tension and uncertainty back in the U.S.
So even with his foreign policy successes, like the Camp David Accords, these domestic challenges, particularly the hostage crisis, really overshadowed his achievements.
Yeah, it's true. The public perception of his presidency really became intertwined with these crises, despite his genuine efforts to address them.
It's interesting how one major event can really shift public opinion, even if a leader has a track record of success in other areas.
That's the nature of politics, especially in times of crisis. And unfortunately for Carter, these events contributed to his defeat in the 1980 presidential election.
So his presidency ended on a rather bitter note. But here's what I find fascinating. It's what he did after leaving office that really seems to have solidified his legacy.
Exactly. And it's what makes Carter such a fascinating figure. You could argue that his most impactful work actually began after he left the White House.
You're talking about his humanitarian work, right? The Carter Center, Habitat for Humanity, that kind of thing.
Precisely. His post-presidency is really a testament to his character and his unwavering belief in service.
Okay, let's delve into this second act. What exactly did he do that was so remarkable?
Well, first of all, he didn't just retire to a life of leisure, which, many former presidents do. Instead, he and Rosalind rolled up their sleeves and got to work. literally.
Right. Literally. What do you mean?
They became deeply involved with Habitat for Humanity, the nonprofit organization that built homes for families in need. And they weren't just like lending their names to the cause. They were out there on construction sites, hammering nails and building alongside volunteers.
That's amazing. It really shows you their commitment to social justice and their willingness to get their hands dirty, so to speak.
It does. But Habitat for Humanity was just one piece of the puzzle. He also established the Carter Center in 1982.
The Carter Center. I've always been curious about this organization. I know they do a lot of different things, but what's their main focus?
Think of it as a global force for good. Their mission is to promote peace, democracy, and health worldwide. They tackle some of the world's toughest challenges.
Okay, that's pretty broad. Could you break it down for me? What are some specific examples of their work?
Sure. They play a key role in monitoring elections in emerging democracies, making sure they're free and fair. They've also been instrumental in mediating conflicts in places like Ethiopia and Sudan.
So they're kind of like international watchdogs, holding governments accountable and promoting peace?
Exactly. They're not afraid to speak truth to power. And then there's their work in global health. They've done incredible work combating diseases like guinea worm disease, which was once widespread in Africa and caused debilitating pain.
Guinea worm disease? That's not something you hear about every day.
It's a parasitic infection caused by drinking contaminated water. The Carter Center has really led the charge in nearly eradicating this disease through education, clean water initiatives, and community-based health programs.
Wow. To go from being president of the United States to leading the fight against a parasitic disease, it's really remarkable. It shows a genuine desire to make a difference,
And his efforts haven't gone unnoticed. In 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for all of this work.
Wow, that's a huge honor. It says a lot about the impact he had, not through, military power or political maneuvering, but through diplomacy and compassion.
Absolutely. And it really makes you think about the different ways to achieve influence on the world stage.
It does. And it's not like he stopped there. On top of all this, he also wrote a ton of books.
He did. He became a prolific author, tackling topics ranging from diplomacy and faith to his personal memoirs and even reflections on aging.
I saw one of his books at the bookstore recently. It's called A Full Life, Reflections at 90.
It really is a full life. And in his writings, he's very open about sharing his experiences, both the highs and the lows, offering insights into his decision-making and personal journey.
It's like he became a philosopher-statesman, reflecting on his life and offering wisdom to future generations.
That's a great way to put it. And beyond his accomplishments, what's really striking is, Carter's character.
Okay, let's talk about the man himself. What kind of person was he, behind the scenes?
By all accounts, he's a man of deep integrity, humility, and unwavering faith. He's known for his down-to-earth demeanor, his sharp intellect, and his genuine compassion for others.
Sounds like he truly lived by the principles he preached.
He did, and that authenticity is evident in everything he does, from his humanitarian work to his writings to his interactions with everyday people.
Okay, but after all of this, the presidency, the Nobel Prize, the global humanitarian efforts, the writing, how did he spend his later years?
He remained remarkably active well into his 90s. He continued to teach Sunday school in his hometown of Plains, Georgia. And he continued to speak out on issues he cared about. He even took up woodworking as a hobby, creating beautiful furniture that he donated to charity.
That's so heartwarming.
Yeah.
Even after achieving so much, he still found joy in simple things like teaching Sunday school and woodworking. It's inspiring.
It is. And it reminds us that even those who reach the highest levels of power are still human beings with their own passions and pursuits.
Did he ever slow down?
He deserved a break after all he'd done. But even in his later years, he never completely stopped working. He faced some health challenges, but he always seemed to bounce back, determined to keep making a difference.
It's incredible, this drive to keep giving back, even as he got older.
It's a powerful reminder that it's never too late to make a positive impact. And his commitment really inspired countless others to get involved in their communities.
And then, in 2024, the world celebrated his 100th birthday. It was a truly remarkable milestone.
It was a global celebration of a life well lived, tributes poured in from all over the world, acknowledging his contributions to peace, human rights, and global health.
It must have been incredibly moving for him to witness that outpouring of love and respect.
It was a testament to his enduring legacy, a legacy built not on political power or wealth, but on compassion, service, and a deep commitment to making the world a better place. His story, Well, it didn't end with his presidency. In many ways, that's where it truly began.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from peanuts to peace treaties, from the highs of Camp David to the challenges of the hostage crisis, from Habitat for Humanity to the Nobel Peace Prize. It's been quite a journey exploring Jimmy Carter's extraordinary life.
It has. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's shift our focus to what we can all learn from this remarkable man.
Sounds good. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far and then come back to unpack the lasting legacy of Jimmy Carter. We've covered a lot about President Carter's life, from his early days on the peanut farm to the Oval Office and all the incredible things he did afterward. What stands out to you the most?
It's the contrasts, really. This, small town Southern boy who becomes president during I'd say one of the most turbulent times in American history. He grapples with these huge challenges, both domestically and internationally, and then leaves office with this cloud of, well, perceived failure.
Yeah, and yet he doesn't just retreat. Instead, he throws himself into service in a way very few former presidents ever have.
Exactly. It's like his presidency almost becomes a footnote compared to the decades of work he does afterward.
It really challenges our typical idea of what it means to be a successful leader, right? Is it about holding on to power, or is it about using your platform to make a real lasting impact, regardless of your title?
And Carter truly embodies that idea of servant leadership. He's not driven by ego or power or anything like that. He genuinely wants to make people's lives better, whether it's building homes with Habitat for Humanity, mediating peace talks, or even fighting a disease most people have never heard of.
And he does it all with this quiet dignity and humility, which is so compelling.
It's almost a contradiction, isn't it? I mean, he's a former president, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a global figure, but he's also incredibly grounded and relatable, teaching Sunday school, taking up woodworking, genuinely enjoying connecting with people from all walks of life.
I think that's a big part of why he's so respected, even by those who might not have agreed with him politically. There's just this authenticity about him, this genuine desire to make a difference that transcends ideology.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, what can we all learn from his approach, especially in today's world where everything feels so polarized and divided?
What do you think his life teaches us about leadership, about service, about making a difference?
It's a reminder that true leadership isn't about power over others, but about empowering them. It's about listening, empathizing, working together to solve problems, putting the needs of others before your own, and using your platform, however big or small, to make a positive impact.
Those are powerful lessons, and not just on a global scale either. I mean, it applies to everyday life too, right? Whether it's volunteering in our community, mentoring someone, even just being kind and compassionate to the people around us.
Exactly. We can all try to embody those Carter-esque qualities in our own way.
As we wrap up our deep dive today, I'm just left feeling this immense admiration for Jimmy Carter. He may not have been a perfect president, but he was a truly remarkable person who dedicated his life to serving others.
And his story isn't over, not really. His legacy will continue to inspire and challenge us for generations to come.
And for our listeners, we encourage you to check out the links in our show notes. You can learn more about the Carter Center and explore some of President Carter's books. Take some time to really delve into his story, think about his life, and ask yourself, what resonates with you? What's one small act of service, one act of kindness that you can do today to make the world a little bit brighter?
And be sure to join us next time for another deep dive as we explore a new topic and uncover more fascinating stories together.
Until then.